Going to be taking a look into the genetics of Egypt, ancient and through the periods, and some interesting correlating data that goes along with it, and later in it showing you Sumerian connections, like what I've been leading into, and of course the ancient Proto-Indo-Europeans and how they play into all this type of thing. It's been compiled by 7 Phoenician 7. Wonderful exhibiting here of just some picked out of the many, many hundreds that could have been selected about ancient Egypt. And yeah, it was a Caucasian or Caucasoid family. You look at these pictures here of all these blue-eyed and Caucasian people, and some of note, this one right here in the middle of the bottom, this is Hamwenu. He's the architect that they credit with the making of the Great Pyramid. So, let's look at some Egyptian DNA, anthropology, and archaeology and see what it says. First, we'll go with some DNA evidence. And what they call Eurasian Adam in his blood lineage consists of Northeast Africans. As you can see in the display here, it runs out a lineage line on the M line. And EM378 is an indigenous Nile Basin origin. Christiani and others in 2007 noted this. E1B1A, M78, probably emerged in northeastern Africa, and Northeast Africans are a mixture of ancestral populations related to current Africans and Eurasians, with more affinity towards the out-of-Africa populations than the sub-Saharan Africans. Egyptians appear to be the closest to the Middle Easterners and Europeans. So genetics is starting to pick apart what part played in what, and at certain time there was an influx back into Africa of Caucasoids and back out. Now, because northern African populations in this time frame are inferred to have substantial non-African ancestry, the expansion south of M78 could have introduced non-African ancestry into the HOA prior to 6,000 years ago, so 4,000 BC. Now, EM78 is indigenous to Egypt area, but you can also see that it is in the Levant. It's out into the Green Sahara Project and right here behind Libya itself. And it also shows out here in the Atlas Mountains and into the Berber populations. Here's an ancient Egyptian scribe. Scribes were known to have been royalty and nobility's children that weren't the one that was necessarily the first or going to pass on to the thing, and they all learned these things. They all had to learn quite a bit, all the ones that were in nobility and royalty and stuff, and they made these neat blue glazed eyes that you see right there that are like glass, that you can actually really kind of look into the eyes in an Egyptian. EV12 times V32 is indigenous to the Nile Basin. Now, these are genetic markers they keep talking about here. It has a frequency of approximately 15% and thus represents Neolithic or pre-Neolithic male continuity and suggests local male adaptation in that area. That was at Smith back in 2013. So we're just leading in here a little bit. And I've got it slowed down because she goes through it rather fast. Sometimes I even have to stop just to make sure because I want to read through it thoroughly. So we see this haplogroup right here of EM78. Egyptians share a common line of descendant with EM81 Berbers. This is your Egyptian line, your Berber, you can see it. This is how they connect and how E comes out of it. This is the genetic cross lines that come out of such things. Here's an ancient Egyptian. The pre-dynastic of Upper Egypt and the late dynastic of Lower Egypt are more closely related to each other than to any other population. So even though they had this big coming together thing, they're really close related, and that relates to what we're going to talk about at the end. But as a whole, they show ties with the European Neolithic North Africa, modern Europe, and more remotely India, but not at all with sub-Saharan Africa, and Brace noticed this. Now, Brace is something that they've tried to take out of context quite a few times, but if you read the whole thing, there's no way to take it out of context. The Nile River Valley Delta population is indigenous to the area. Local comparisons between Upper Egyptians were carried out with other ethnic groups in Egypt based on a frequency in molecular data. No differences were observed in comparison with the general Caucasian population from Cairo in any of the 9 loci compared with the Egyptian Christians from Cairo. So your Copts seem to be about the closest relative and the people that were least untouched coming out the end of all of this. MDS, based on pairwise FST genetic distances of Upper Egyptian and other diverse global populations, showing the Upper Egyptian population is closer to the Middle Eastern, North African, South Asian, and European populations than what he just termed says others. So in a lot of these, they don't necessarily just come right out and say, no, it's white people and all this type of thing. It's just Caucasians and who they're related to and so on. But why did anybody ever have a question whenever this is Isis from the earliest of dynasties? These long-haired goddesses. Is this Neferaten or is that Tai? That's Neferaten, I believe. And cattle had been brought into the area. Cattle weren't indigenous to the area, and we'll get to that here shortly too. Rowald and others in 2007 reported on the presence of mitochondrial DNA, haplogroups that show evidence of originating in the Near East in their Egyptian and Jordanian samples. Based on these results, the author suggested a southward diffusion from the Levant into Egypt from the Middle Paleolithic to the Neolithic around 25,000 through to 5,000 years ago in repeated migration. Similar results were reported by Musilova and others in 2011 and Raxter himself. So here we have 3 guys, Musilova, Raxter, and Rowald, who are correlating this data in together. Similar, same. And so this shows you a lot of Middle Eastern that's in this. It shows you that there's a lot of Caucasian admix, but then also there's an influx way back when into their genetics of people coming out and from the East and from the Middle East and from up in Levant, which they call the thing Asia itself, Asia Minor, and so Anatolia coming in from up there. But then there's also the indigenous population that's there that is all around the entire Mediterranean with nothing breaking it up, including the Nile Delta. And they can tell that all of those have a genetic continuity, but slight variations on a theme and who connects with which one more. And so Neolithic populations diffused into the region from the east, where they contributed to the rise of the Egyptian kingdoms. Da-da! They found this way back in 1995. It was simple to go off of genetics even back then, and of course it's just correlated over and over. Nothing's been discredited or thrown out in any way. Wish that would come a little crisper for y'all. Studies focusing on mtDNA suggest that 2 genetic lineages of the M1 and U6 haplogroups originated in Western Asia about 40,000 years ago and spread together with the modern humans into Northern Africa about 40,000 years ago. Somewhere around in there, and so this relates it about a Cro-Magnon time and running through about in there whenever they consider this all to be modern humans today, and And now they've really had to step back and go towards Homo sapiens, and now Jebel Irhoud shows a skeleton that dates to about 315,000 BC. That is the same people that they classified earlier at dates of around 70,000 and then 200,000 and more of what they call modern humans. So modern humans coming of age goes way back a lot farther than we originally were looking at. And that's, of course, if we want to correlate everybody on the planet to be what was a modern human. Some people say modern human is like steam engines. Modern human is what? What is modern human? Well, if to make everybody a modern human, at the point that we started studying all this, we have to go back to about that time to be able to grasp it. Now, these early populations represent the root stock of the early settlers, inhabitants of the Eastern Sahara, who were subsequently to people the Nile Valley and build one of the first organized civilized states, the Egyptian Pharaonic Empire. And you can see this whenever you see the Green Sahara Project and how they have two people that are there. They have a Neptunes there and the Tenarians, and one is slightly taller than the other and a little bit different. There's a spread in time there, and as you get closer to it, and then they say, well, these are the people that ended up over in Egypt here. And of course, they used to have wadis and things that they went out to all the time, sacred rituals where they would go out into the desert to oracles and things along that nature that's mentioned, that I'll do in one of my other ones I've got coming up. It's about the mysticism and magic of ancient Egypt, but that doesn't really correlate in with this. We're just talking about genetics and things and not magic. But at least two Eurasian lineages, M1 and U6, had Paleolithic implantation and subsequent expansions in North Africa, reaching the Sahel and Sudan belts. It seems that the main focus of distribution of U6 was in the northwest and M1 in the northeast areas of the continent. And they noticed this back from just the skeletons and things they had found back then and testing on those, and the genetics of the current people, seeing some bleed in of what was going on. But also they noted in one of these papers here, and I think it's Bacata also, that it seemed like it was a cul-de-sac where it seemed to come down and go back, and it never did go down and go past the Horn area. And it also never, from sub-Saharan Africa, came into that area until the much later Bantu expansion and so on. But there were the Nubians. So let's look farther into this. It keeps going here. The female haplogroups M1 and T show the highest frequencies in Egypt. The most important genetic expansion affecting North Africa since the Paleolithic times had a Near Eastern provenance with only minor Western influences shown in them. And that's NFA back in 2011. The Near Eastern contribution to the pool of H lineages in North Africa was minimal, indicating that the prehistoric European lineage input occurred in elevated frequencies, enriching the ancient Near Eastern background of Northern Africa populations, mainly constituted by the low frequency of haplogroups U6 and M1. Now, that's kind of stating the fact that it seems to have been dominated by this set that comes in, and it enriches the people there at the same time as enriching the genetics of the people, this mixture that sets there. And this is Nofret, and you can't see it in the picture here. She's got blue eyes. And Nefertiti, often contested, still has one blue eye. R1B1C, or V88, has a coalescence age between 9.2 and 5.6 thousand years ago, and Eurasian origin, and entered northeastern Africa from the Near East. Now, haplogroup T has its highest variability in present-day Syria. A migration of northeast Africa from this area occurred by T1 males with a coalescence age of 14,000 years ago. So this isn't like new and the Syrians there. They're talking about the endemic population that was there into them, not the Turkic influence later and so on like that. It goes on, but more of it straightforward, I guess you'd say, and what they call T or T males. And they noted it between 5,500 to 9,000 years ago, and probably happened at more than one interval. A similar migration was by T1A1B P77 males with a coalescence age of 7.6 thousand years ago. These lineages may well have entered northeast Africa shortly after 7.6 thousand years ago as a group of distantly related male farmers. Now, haplogroups R1, B1C, V88, and T thus inform of relevant male migrations to northeastern Africa. So they're saying this is where the people came from and this is your genetic set for it. And I noticed some of y'all, this is just gibberish and numbers and stuff, but these are exact certain genetic codes that are in people's genes that they have found that all of these people have this, all these people have that, and so on. They've made these markers, and then they see where they originate from, and they can look in your genome and kind of see how long ago it was too by how it's placed in the set of it and in order of what happened in what way. And they're getting better and better and better and better at it, and it's becoming quite an incredible science. And if you thought somebody could find a drop of a blood and then turn around and peg somebody and go, it was him, Your Honor, and be exactly right, that's totally true. But now we've gotten to the point where we can look back at these things and see other people from different migrational areas and realize where they had gone. Now, R1b's Holocene integration into Egypt and beyond is something that's quite neat to show. Back in the Holocene, they had a runaround that was all up here through the Black Sea area and stuff, and it had ran all the way up into Upper China, where we were talking about just the other day on some of these other videos about Proto-Indo-Europeans, and around through Arabia. But it also, at 15,000 BC, dives all the way into Central Africa and runs all the way through. And this is how you get R1b and its Holocene integration into certain populations. And it definitely helped pretty much most every population it ran into. EM34 is a candidate related to the spread of pastoralism or agriculture from the Levant to northeast Africa. Its variability is higher in the Levant than in the Horn of Africa, and this implies that EM34 males moved into northeast Africa from the Levant. And there's more correlating data than that, but what they're saying is they see these animals and this spread of pastoralists and Neolithic farmers, and that's who shows up down here. And they have pottery that matches it and the corded ware stuff and things like that that ends up going, okay, well, we can kind of see the same symbology. And I've got a deal where it shows all up in the area here they're talking about in Syria and above, where it has that woman with her arms held up in the air looking kind of like a ballerina or whatever, and that carries down into Egypt. And I'm about to show that to you in another video that I've got correlating in what another Egyptologist himself has shown to find from early paintings on the walls and stuff, and these boats, and it talks about it up here coming up. I don't want this thing to go too long, so I'm going to try to read just some of it, but I can't keep from over-vamping some of it with things that I know in correlation. It is certain that Holocene Neolithic incoming pastoralists and farmers did not replace the entire pre-Neolithic population in northeast Africa. J1 pastoralists into northeast Africa can be NRY dated to about 7,000 years ago, right? And we still found clear genetic evidence of a strong Near Eastern input that can be dated into the Neolithic. This is revealed by high frequencies and high internal variability of several mtDNA lineages from the haplogroup T. The whole genome sequencing strategy and molecular dating allowed us to detect the accumulation of local mdTNA diversity from about 5.1 thousand to 3.6 thousand years before the present, or years ago, depending on which way you want to call it out. KYA is becoming a lot more popular. BP was for a long time, and of course BC was before that, but that integrates a 2,000 year change. When you say something's 10,000 years ago, you're saying that it's 8,000 BC. so it throws you off. In fact, I have that same problem where I was originally taught one way and we go the other, and I keep doing the same thing where I say 6,000 years ago and I mean 6,000 BC. I correct myself most of the time. The T, Y, D, T, and A haplogroups originated in the area of the Levant approximately 21,000 years ago, and the T, M70 subhaplogroup was present in Northeast Africa by at least 14,000 years ago. And I think it does a rippling effect at about every 7,000, 6 or 7,000 years. They can see this thing, where maybe that has something to do with it too. And I think that integration of 7,000 years shows us the cycles that we go through in our solar system that cause problems that may cause issues on the planet, as to say, but that correlated data is not quite there yet. Southwest Asia is interpreted as the origin of J1, and thus an association of J1 descendants with an expansion of pastoralists is possible. The expansion of J1 sublineages around 7,000 years ago can be interpreted as pastoralist expansion and from somewhere in the Near East that spread throughout the Sahara. Throughout the Sahara. Before it was a desert. What they call the Green Sahara. So, let's get to that next slide. J1's wide distribution in Saharan regions and more southerly frequency peaks in Northeast Africa are most easily interpreted as the remnants of an intrusive mid-Holocene pastoralist revival. The far-reaching spread of pastoralism associated with NRY haplogroup J1 suggests that the spread of genetically improved sheep from the Southwest Asia was caused by male migration. So in other words, a lot of males had come and farmers had broke out and separated themselves. And quite often you can imagine that whenever men were Neolithic and farmers and populations got big and somebody decided to see what the hell was over that mountain. Sometimes they took men and women, other times it would be men, and sometimes they would never come back. So here we see that distribution of J1 and how it shows up thick through the Middle East and really off into, Persian and the Arabian Peninsula here, and it's got a pocket that's real hot right there for some snappy little reason, huh? But also you can see that it's real hot in Italy too, and then across what we would say North Africa itself all through there. Ranging from 30% is the light green all the way up to an extreme high number. Here's an ancient Egyptian. Big old ears on them and stuff. Yep, that's Caucasian. Markers signaling to the Neolithic expansion from the Middle East. 12 F2, M201, and M35 derivatives that constitute the predominant components of these two Afro-Asiatic populations. 12 F2 and the M201 are Eurasian in origin and reinforce the idea that the migratory movements between Eurasia and Africa involving these chromosomes occurred mainly across the Levantine corridor. So these are people influxing, going around through there, and then Africa is kind of that thing stuck off on the edge. There's a small little gap that leads off into it there, and that really pretty much allows for something like a kind of pocketed situation to go on. Libya and Egypt are also the smallest genetic distances away from European populations. So closest is another way to say that same way. Demic diffusion during the Neolithic period could explain the genetic similarity between Northeast Africa and Europe, though a parallel process of gene flow from the Near East. Markers that are looking at here is what they found out that showed up in King Tut, and they all line up to where it's like, wow, that's almost seen today. So they know that he has connections with people that are now genetically showing up in Northwestern Europe. North African populations have a significant excess of derived alleles shared with Neanderthals, and when compared to sub-Saharan Africans who have none, really, and some of them do have a small portion from admix from Caucasians, but that's another issue. This excess is similar to that found in non-African humans. In fact, that can be interpreted as a sign of Neanderthal admixture. So in other words, they have about the same Neanderthal admixture as everybody else does, and so they're the same people. And some show early look at Egyptians showed there was a little bit higher Neanderthal frequencies in them. There was a couple of samples that showed up almost 10% of it was from the Neanderthal genome, and some 4s and 6s whenever our common genetics show up something around 2 to 4 on an average. A lot of people 1, and so on. Furthermore, the Neanderthal's genetic signal is higher in populations with a local pre-Neolithic North African ancestry. Therefore, the detected ancient admixture is not due to recent Near Eastern or European migrations. In other words, archaic Caucasians. Who, by the way, if you look at the skin data they have and everything now, shows that they had light pale skin a long time before. Then this one paper taken out of context where people said the light skin genes and so on, and that's putting two things together. It's saying there's this person they know with his genetics, he had blue eyes and so on, and carries that trait. He was a pale Caucasian. We don't see it earlier than that, but that guy's genetics seems to show up in a hell of a lot of people. It's a little bit taken out of context, but we'll go with that. And you look at these Egyptians here on the walls. Now, sure, they were drawn with red ochre a lot of times. This is outlined with red ochre, and so the pictures are drawn. And of course, the male is drawn again, tanner or darker than the female, showing that he does a lot of the work, she doesn't. And back then, look at the female, and she's drawn with pink. Now, I showed a recent 4th dynasty excavation they have, and there's the women are pink and stuff in there too. It's a different color that they lost, decided not to use for certain reasons. I'm not sure why. And like I said in that video, I'm looking for like what the hell was up with that pink, and why did they make it out of pink, and so on. But yeah, ancient Egyptians, Caucasoids. Well, the males are tan. Well, the females are pale as hell. And look at this long hair. That's Cher. North African populations are distinct from sub-Saharan Africans based on cultural, linguistic, and phenotypic attributes. The indigenous North African ancestry is more frequent in populations with historical Berber ethnicity. And I've shown you a few videos here of Berbers, Moors, and then the one I did on the Amazigh that's really taken from another girl's pictures from there, and just a correlated data off of that. But yeah, in most North African populations, we also see substantial shared ancestry with the Near East. A migration of individuals with Nilotic ancestry into Egypt occurred about 25 generations ago, approximately 750 years ago. So there you go. This is the newer people that are there and the flux that comes in, if you would. The mitochondrial DNA of Middle Kingdom period Egyptian priests was similar to modern mtDNA samples from the Delta, Pabo and Reisno, suggesting some level of genetic population continuity between ancient and modern populations. So they're saying there is a lot of correlating data, and there's still a lot of genetics there, and around that Delta area and these cops, there's a lot of connecting data still that's in there. Look at a little bit of anthropological evidence here. What are we getting up to here? Almost 30. It's obvious that both pre-dynastic and late dynastic Egyptians are more closely related to the European cluster than they are to any other major regional clusters in the world. As a whole, they show ties with the European Neolithic, North Africa, modern Europe, and with remotely India, but not at all with sub-Saharan Africa. I think that's the one we saw before with Brace on there, but it again gets shown up, and quite often this is what gets cited in other people's paper whenever they say, hey, well, mine shows this data, and Brace and others et al. say da da da, and it comes up, so it's correlating data. Hoffman notes a population explosion on a small settlement at Heracleopolis in upper southwest Egypt between 3800 and 3400 BC, which is right in the Nakata period, I believe, which had been settled by people from northern Egypt sometime around 4000 BC. So you find this sweeping into there and people coming in and the change they had, but there was earlier ones too. North Africans have a morphological sample, mass-reduced teeth. This dental pattern was shown to be ubiquitous among samples regardless of distance, from the Canary Islands to Egypt and Nubia, or time, from 8,000-year-old Capsians to recent Berbers in western North Africa. They all have this same cranial kind of form, and there's what's known as the dental pattern, the Mediterranean dental pattern, and so on, that these people that are way into the bones and things like that can they have latched onto. It's like, oh, it's more like this, it's more like that. A lot of people were slightly buck-toothed in the area there, had a slight overbite, and so on. This pattern, termed the North African dental trait complex, includes high frequencies of several traits such as an interruption groove on U12, M3 agenesis, and rocker jaw, plus a low occurrence of M2 Y5 groove pattern. All these features are also present in Europeans and West Asians to some degree, but are uncommon in sub-Saharan peoples. And this is just correlating data. She's going to put it together hundreds and hundreds, one of them, but this is where some people are saying, hey, all this North African people don't have anything to do with sub-Saharans, and they really don't. We knew it all along, and I don't know what we get taught in school they didn't, but somehow it gets out of school and everybody's all like, there's a debate, and then, oh, maybe they were Egyptians, maybe they were the Hebrews. It's gotten just disgusting. Craniometric indicators appear to support these results, and Europeans like discrete traits such as alveolar ornathism, dilocephaly, rhomboid orbits, or the eye sockets, narrow nasal aperture, and the slits, like I showed in a lot of my videos, and nasal seal are prevalent. So this is showing you that they pretty much have European-like discrete traits on all these guys that are there, and giving the opportunity to, you say, oh, it's Europeans doing this. No, they have examples of North Africans and Berbers and so on and everything, and they're saying, well, these kind of match up to this. Heracleopolis pre-dynastic inhabitants appear to be uniform in cranial size and form, and two, they show some resemblance to other post-Pleistocene populations of North Africa, as well as Europe and West Asia. They appear distinct from post-Pleistocene sub-Saharan Africans, though. Irish noticed this way back in 2000 whenever he was writing his papers. Yeah, quite a few interesting. So you can see the slit in there, the eye sockets and the nasal slit that's really a point, a real pointy pyramid. On a black person, it's really more of a rounded, almost shovel shape. And you can see the connections here with Nakata, North Africa, pre-dynastic Europe. These people coupled together, right? Late dynastic and pre-dynastic are the closest together. North Africans come less popular than Europe. Europe seems to be more in there than even North Africans constants. Then you pull off, and then you have some Nubia and India and Somali that's in there much later, and it's a smaller portion. And whenever they start looking at non-metric data, you can see that it clusters around here real good. Ancient modern Greeks, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and modern Germans all cluster around here real good, right? The problem being that also Europeans and North Africans, green is North African, red is Europeans, and black is sub-Saharan Africans in this one, and they're all up under the words. I think this is the one where she shows the deal afterwards. It can show each one of them, but which one is which symbol. And she went ahead and made them red, even though it's the same reds and greens here, but all the black ones up here that are black squares, that's sub-Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. You can see how far they're off and how these cluster together. Another example of how the cranial forms, the DNA, all these things show you where it points to, and it actually shows you a lot of Europeans. And I know a lot of people don't realize it, but the current populations that's there is an Arabic people, kind of a nomadic type people that had come in, Bedouins and so on, that had come into the area. But in fact, they're listed on this cluster that's shown right there. I don't know how much farther we've got in this. There's a Badarian affiliation to North Africans, not sub-Saharan samples. Irish and Königsberg noticed this. For the most part, Basques don't exhibit any trait that sets them apart from neighboring Indo-European or Afro-Asiatic populations. In northern Africa or the Levant, the historic Basque sample clusters with England and the Levant. Northwest Africa clusters with the Nile Valley as expected, but they also group with Denmark. This is where I was showing you the tribe of Dan and Danes and Den. So there's another connection there of the 12 tribes that are supposed, that are really just named off of giant groups of people that had become others, and names that are attached to them, and they pulled that out as being the people of that area, the correlating names, I guess you'd say. Cold adapted populations are known to have both relatively wide bodies, and they're also ancient Egyptian body mass is said in another to have relative stature is greater than expected and does not fit the typical tropical adapted scheme. So in other words, it's odd, but these Egyptians are cold adapted. It says that in a few of these old papers where they're looking at the difference between their femurs, your top leg bone, your bottom leg bone, and the relative shorter versions. Here it is, relative short tibiae, right? So they have relative short. Badarian and early dynastic period populations have a shorter tibiae than predicted from femoral length. I'm like, wow, so these people, they're like even real cold adapted. Why would they be cold adapted? That's strange. Well, we did just come out of an ice age here just a few thousand years ago, so skeletal variation among ancient Egyptians supports scenarios of biological continuity among prehistoric and historic samples. So in other words, it hasn't changed. It's always been Caucasians. The ABO blood type frequencies in ancient Egyptians show no signs of differing significantly from that of present-day Egyptians. According to the authors, the blood group distributed obtained for Asuit, Gebelin, and Aswan necropoles shows resemblance with the present leucoderm population of Egypt, and particularly with its more conservative fraction. Leucoderms are known to be the real pale people that have red hair, blonde hair, and so on. And Ramses is known to have been a leucoderm. Comparison of C group and Pangrave Nubians to Badari and Heliconopolis separate Badari from other samples, indicating no biological affinities with these earlier Nubian groups. And you pause that and you read it again. So the C group, Nubian C group, and Pangrave Nubians to Badari and Hyrcanopolis separate Badari from the other samples, indicating no biological affinities with these earlier Nubian groups. In other words, they weren't Nubians. They aren't really kin to them at all. The Nubians were to come in off that. Here's some archaeological evidence, and hopefully we get through all of this, but then this has got the Sumerian connections at the end of it. By the 6th millennium BC, Neolithic populations of farmers and herders from the southern Levant and Arabia, or over in Sumerian area, were poised to cross into North Africa. The most detailed record concerning their arrival comes from Egypt, where farming villages first appeared in the Nile Valley archaeological record at about 5000 BC. So 7,000 years ago. And this is a first wave of your Neolithic Sumerian type farmers. They also had some come from down Anatolia and up the people up in there in Catalhoyuk area. With the introduction of advanced technology in the form of bifacial implements rooted into the Levant and the domestic livestock, sheep, goats, in addition to domestic cattle, the first evidence is seen of farming communities in the Fayum. And this is where they brought farming into Egypt, right? Same time period. This is brought there. to the people, and they did fine for a couple of thousand years there, and then boom, it turned into a kingdom. And what we call a kingdom really was just one point in time for them. Archaeologists have uncovered the earliest known agricultural settlement from ancient Egypt. The crops and animals and techniques for raising them were all introduced into Egypt from the ancient Middle East, or Sumeria, where domestication of plants and animals is known to have existed as far back as 9000 BC. It came together as a package around 7000 BC. There's a big connection for you, and there's your earliest influx first connection, and then there's a later one when a great flood happens and they pull back into again. And this is looked at as being portion of your Bible, but taken out of context somewhat. But Buto 3 features sherds of Palestinian ceramics of the same type as that imported in the UJ Tomb 277. These two phenomena suggest that the jars may have come from Lower Egypt, and the particular make of these jars strongly suggests a Palestinian touch, because they form, these people are way up into pottery, man. Anyhow, which might have resulted from the presence of Palestinian groups continuing to live in the delta after the fall of the Mahdi, which is like a Nakata 2, or the end of Nakata 2, not the start of it. They kind of have an A and B on that now, and that would be Nakata B. Just saying that those Neolithic people are still there, and they were a good part of it. The seals and cylinder seals we have described bear witness to an early link between Mesopotamia and Egypt. And in my other video, I'm going to show you where these cylinder seals, where they have they press and roll them out in clay, is what starts Egypt. And they have these chips too that they use for bartering back and forth and things. And this is directly taken from Sumerian, and it's ideograms from there. Now, it should be noted, however, that the relationship between Egypt and Nakata II periods and Mesopotamia of the Middle East period was a one-way thing. And yeah, it was a one-way thing. So in other words, this wasn't trade. Like I'm trying to tell you, this wasn't trade. This was influx of a large amount of people with an idea. And these people already had mastabas and things and step pyramid concepts. And people are trying to misstate this bull, but it's not true. It predates it here by quite some time, and they bring it to them. To date, no trace has been found of any contemporary Egyptian artifacts in the regions of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers and the tributaries. On the other hand, though, the imported artifacts and Mesopotamian influences in Egypt are manifold. So people had noticed this way back, 2005 and so on, and I was deep into it probably 10 years before that. And others kept showing it and became an easy thing. So this is kind of old hat to me, but I'm just going over it and keep getting deeper and deeper into the web. Nothing disproves the notion that the knives-bearing motifs of Mesopotamian inspiration date back to the Nakata II period, including the well-known Jebel Arak knife. And that's in my other video too, because it's known as being the earliest Egyptian. It's supposed to be that Menez Narmer type thing and all that. Well, what is it? Well, it's a Sumerian motif where the guy's grabbing the lions and holding them up and stuff, and he's got the hat and he's wearing Sumerian stuff and things. And you can even still see Sumerian stuff and actual Narmer palette and things like that. The strange double-necked creature that you see coming up making the loop is found in Sumerian iconography from before then. And of course the Sumerians used crushed coal and things in their eyes too, so it makes you wonder if they had brought that even to these people. Earliest records of Hamitic longhorns in Africa are from Egypt, dating around 5000 BC. The Badarian people originated from Asia and therefore may have brought the cattle with them. Bad means city, and Aryan means Aryans, and the people of Orion. And you see the pharaohs standing in an Orion position whenever they're smoting their people and stuff. It's well known that's a connection that goes from earliest of things. The spread of farming technology from north to south in the Nile Valley may possibly explain the early Neolithic sites in the north. And Hassan states that around 6500, 6000 or 4000 BC, there were transmissions to the first from the Sinai westward and then southward, as perhaps reflected by the Badarian agriculture communities in the Middle East. And this was by Bard back in 94. I know this is going on long, guys, but it's not too far off. We only have about a minute and a half left. The origins of this building with palace facade paneling, one of the earliest symbols of Egyptian kingship, is once again borrowed from Mesopotamia. That's just stated blandly. What they're talking about is the architecture on the outside of the mastabas, and the earliest ones in Egypt have this in-raised and out-raised paneling going on to it, insets that are going down it in a pattern, and all of Egypt's are the same way as they are in Sumeria's and stuff. And indeed, Susatu and Uruk glyphics frequently feature in niched brick architecture, which represent the Mesopotamian leaders' palaces of this same period. Its similarity with the Egyptian Serek is striking. In fact, it's more than striking. You can find that the earliest pyramids were done with mastabas, and then they came to be step mastabas, triple mastabas, step pyramids, and then they smoothed them off. Tel Faka appeared to be one of the most promising for collecting data for the study of human societies in the 4th millennium BC in the eastern delta. A pottery model of a boat was recovered about 10 centimeters long, about 7 inches, was a flat, slightly convex bottom, high vertical stern, and an upward curving bow. These are the pointy-tipped boats that you're familiar with. These sides of the ship are notched. This type of vessel is referred to as a Mesopotamian boat. And so where do they get their boats from? And their reed boats. Because the Sumerians had their reed houses and giant reed huts that look, yeah, man, they look like palaces. They look like resorts that you go to. I went diving and stuff they had these resorts that looked exactly like that, these huge things made out of all reeds and stuff. It's just amazing. I've showed them to you in a couple of my videos, but it's Sumerian reed huts, and it's nothing like a dung hut, that's for sure. The style of the carved wooden coffins of the Black Sea region showed up later as stone coffins in Egypt, and so now we can see those people coming down to here, the people from 5,000 years BC coming down. At Memoradev, bowls were round with the typical Yarmoukon palm frond or herringbone pattern motif between two parallel lines, a reserved background, seeming to indicate Palestine is the origin of this culture. And they had a lot of date and palm fronds and so on like that. Indeed, Phoenicia has something to do with the date trees, as well as the color purple, as well as the phoenix. The fact that the first of all pyramids is stepped or terraced, and moreover built of small rectangular stones reminiscent of the mud bricks of the mastabas from which it evolved, not reminiscent, they're the exact size. The original mud brick sizes they used were the same size. They used the same cubit idea. It's where that sizing comes from. It changes a couple of times, but we don't need to go there. And it's where it evolved. In the context, possible Sumerian Egyptian connections cannot wholly be disregarded. The origins of ziggurat building can probably be traced back to the White Temple at Uruk in the 34th century BC. Some might see elements in the Zoser or Djoser complex of the last flowering of the Mesopotamian connection to Egypt. Zoser's pyramid is inevitably calls something of the Sumerians' towering terrace structures, and I've shown you a video on that recently where they've now totally figured out that it was just a Sumerian mastaba, and then they built over that larger as double-stepped pyramid, made it a thread, and then stacked it out to where it was at 6 high, and in different periods, and had redone it. And it shows you that it wasn't really originally from that exact time, it was a redo. So, correlating data, and that's why I show you all these parts, these little sections and stuff, and why it really makes a difference whenever you know those small pieces of that puzzle and those little pieces of that web, because once you can put it all together and somebody slaps with information, it seems to just stretch a line across, and you're like, oh man, that makes a lot more sense now, right? Anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy, and take a look at 7P7's 7 Phoenician 7's channel too. She's got so many enlightening videos. A lot of them are full of genetics and things like that, and interesting. And she does a great job of making a video presentation that I fail to do quite often. Anyhow, peace.